Evening, welcome to the city council meeting, our first council meeting of 2023 on January 3rd at 6 p.m. start. So thank you for those who have joined us this evening. And we'll proceed tonight by starting our meeting by having council member Ekstrom give us a thought, invocation, pledge of allegiance. So council member Ekstrom.
Okay, we'll begin with an invocation. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are so very grateful. We are so very grateful to be gathered together as members of this wonderful community. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have to live in such a beautiful place. We're grateful for the spirit that resides here, for the spirit of community and love and friendship and fellowship that we have. We're grateful for this new year and for all of the promises that it affords us. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have to serve and love one another. Please bless us with thy spirit that thou might attend this meeting. Please bless us with insight and guidance and direction that we may be able to make wise decisions. Please bless us that we may be wise stewards over the resources that we have been entrusted. We're again so grateful for all that we have and ask these things humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, council member Ekstrom. Excellent job. Just encourage council members to invite members of the community to participate. Make us in our opening remarks and pledge of allegiance. And it's good to see. It's been a while. Hope you had a good holiday season. Everybody's smiling, so I think things went well. We'll go ahead and start with our consent agenda this evening. If you've had a chance to look at items on the agenda this evening, anyone have any conflicts of interest, actual or perceived, they'd like to disclose? I don't see any. Okay. So we would look for an action to consider the November 1st, 2022 City Council meeting minutes. Has anyone had a chance to read those, and are there any corrections?
I didn't see any, but we're waiting for JD to chime in.
I was gonna say, I did read them, but I didn't notice anything. Okay.
I read them and did not notice
Okay.
anything.
Oh, very good.
Fantastic.
In that case, Mayor, I move that we approve the November 1st, 2022 minutes.
Thank you for that motion, Councilmember Swanson. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Councilmember Ekstrom. Any further comments? All those in favor of approving the minutes of the November 1st, 2022 City Council meeting, please say aye.
I
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. We'll now enter to our active agenda, and John, if you would watch to see if we have any comments from those who are online with us tonight. And we welcome them along with those who are here in attendance this evening. So at this point in time, we'll entertain public comments. I would encourage you to state your name and if you're a resident of North Ogden. And please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. So if you have a comment now, would be the time, step up to the podium and state what your comments are.
Howdy.
Hello?
Hi.
I think half the reason I do this is because I'm nervous talking to a group of people I don't know. So I've got a question. Oh, Ben Olis, 1016 East, 2675 North, here in North Ogden. I've got a question. Mayor, I don't know how to pronounce your last name properly. Barube.
That's close.
Okay, cool. All right. You had made a comment in the North Ogden Connection magazine that there is a committee of volunteer citizens that you guys are bringing on to give input in developing the fiscal 2024 budget.
Correct.
I was wondering if it's possible for me to get on that group of volunteers.
Councilmember Swanson has taken on that responsibility, so I'll let him respond. we'd like to have additional members of that committee.
I don't know, John. I think at some point we have to cut it off. We have how many now? Yeah.
I was gonna say
7?
6 or 7, I guess with, it is a public meeting, and what I was gonna say is legally, it's easy to add, we just put it as an agenda item. I think we have had committees as many as 13, and that, we've seen that being too many. Participation drops significantly when we get that many people, but it is just a subcommittee that doesn't vote or do anything, so space wise, I probably wouldn't go more than 10 if we could avoid it, but
Well, I'll ask council. Council, are you okay with one more?
I think it sounds good.
How do I?
Ask
Oh.
the committee. Anderson's leading it.
so we'll bring it back as an agenda item to add a committee or a member to that subcommittee
Okay.
for next.
If you can make sure you leave us with your name and contact information,
I will.
that'd be great.
Okay.
Also, I checked with Councilmember Swanson, we will be publishing contact information for those members of the committee. We would like as much input from the public as we can get, but we do have to be reasonable in the number of members there so that we can accomplish things. So appreciate your willingness to step forward and volunteer.
Okay, and who would I give this to you now? Or you'll take it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
right.
Susan is the one that keeps track of if you give it to me, I will probably lose it. But
Okay.
if you give it to her, she will keep track of it.
Okay. All right, that's all for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Is there anyone online?
Not at this time.
Anyone here in the audience have further comments? All right, seeing none, we'll move on our agenda. This evening, we've discussed primarily 2 items. One is the development of the Sears property located northeast of the Cove at Jake Drive, and I think Nebo Avenue. Scott Hess, who is our planning director, will lead this discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We actually have our applicant representative here from Wasatch Civil as well, Chaz. So invite him up and do just a brief introduction to the project and then the reason that you're seeing it right now. So we've got approximately 75 acres that is east of the Cove and just slightly north. It's all below the Forest Service property. It's all below the power lines up there. 75 total acres. It's currently zoned HP3, which would require 2 acres per single unit of development, or approximately 37 homes. And what the applicant has proposed is a clustered subdivision that would be done through development agreement and some sort of rezone that goes up to about 177 units or so. Depends on total and what they could do in the float map, and there's geologic issues up there that they would need to look at. The applicant and the property owners, Donald and Douglas Sears, met with the city, and we recommended that the city council might be the first best step to go to and have this conversation about what the appetite is for potential rezoning, knowing that before you spend a bunch of money on engineering studies and geologic work, that the ultimate decision rests in your hands as the legislative body for the city. So it can be, a finding can be made that this meets the general plan. It would still be relatively low density, single family up there, averaging on the whole approximately 10,000 square foot lots or so, depending on the number of acres that you went to. Be about 3 units per acre. So you're more like 15,000 square foot lots on average. So it's HP 10 or HP 12 and a half, something like that. We have a lot of that on the hillside. We did ask the developer to consider some questions and notes. Mayor and I had a chance to meet, and I've written down our questions that we had as we looked through this. That was in the staff report. And then also to just think about the trade-offs. So typically when you look at an upzone, the city's in somewhat of a negotiation position. You can accept the higher density, but on the other side of that higher density or additional units typically come with some benefits or trade-offs for the city. There is an underlying land use right here. It isn't 0. They can build 37 homes up there, but the costs are going to be pretty high because it's an area that needs culinary water, firefighting water. You've got roadway needs, Our fire marshal has indicated that any additional doors, any additional rooftops up there would need a secondary access off of the hill. So at a certain, the cove itself is kind of a singular access point at Mountain Road in Jackson to get in and out of that area. So we have some challenges to discuss, but I think that it's a good idea to just get the developer in front of the applicant, in front of the council, and see what your questions, concerns, and appetite is before it starts running through any sort of planning commission and city council process for rezone or development agreement. With that, do you have any questions about orientation, about where it's at, or what the project consists of?
Okay, so I would just want to make sure I'm understanding. Right now, it's zoned for essentially
So,
2-acre lots.
yeah, 2-acre lots.
2-acre lots, and they want to go down to about 1/3 of an acre, but it's challenging terrain,
Yeah.
correct? So, if every single lot were buildable, it would go up to 177, but it seems unlikely that all of them are gonna be buildable.
It really depends, and you look at this area, there's overlays that you could think of, each one of these trail connections that are running north-south, and then you've got a couple east-west, so not the. So these are trail chutes right now, which many of these, and I haven't fully checked this, but many of those are kind of down the bottom, they're like the trough. And then you have peaks and valleys here, right? So this dark area is estimated to be approximately 6,000 square foot lots. To do a balancing on a hillside for 6,000 square foot lots, it requires a lot of cut and fill. So you gotta fill in the low spots and cut down the high spots. And even then, 6,000 square foot lots on a hillside, it can be challenging to fit enough real estate that's flat to put a house on it. So they've got some geologic work to figure out what is and is possible essentially. But a bubble map like this doesn't give us quite enough detail to say, yes, that does work. No, it doesn't. That's really not our responsibility either. I mean, they would need to provide that through their geologic studies. So on average, this is about 15,000 square foot lots for the whole 75 acres, but there's areas that have higher density. So there's some clustered spots that may not develop the entire bubble here. You would end up with, one of those homes down on like a portion of it.
The trails that are throughout the proposed community, are they any guesstimation on how wide these are? Because by the looks of it, it seems like they'd be pretty right on top of the houses, and there's not a lot of, so people probably want to be up there hiking and they're not gonna feel like they're in nature that close. Just curious, is that like a 20-foot wide area? What would it look like?
That's a great question about what maybe the trail easement would exist in there. Most of these are user created trails that have remained open for many years. So they're existing trail networks that are probably just a single track wide or maybe a double track. So like something we take a razor up. But it, again, it remains to be seen what the actual development pattern looks like there with the house, how the houses lay out, and whether it's backyard to backyard or there's a buffer space there.
Councilman Swanson?
What kind of houses are we talking about? Are these all detached, single family?
Yeah, everything in this proposal is all single family detached.
Okay. So no townhomes, no condos.
Not unless it was something that the city was interested in doing, but we'd like to kind of see them, the houses a little closer together, just so we can, more high-end, nice houses, but nothing that's kind of cookie cutter townhomes. It's not. Unless there's a need for that, which, if there's something that the city would like to see with that, we would be willing to look at that as well.
Scott, Century Farms, what size lots are we doing there?
Those went down to 4,000. I think the smallest is 4,200.
They're detached, but that we went down to 4,000.
Yeah, and they're 5-foot side yards, so that which is the minimum permitted by the building
I
code.
was just trying to remember
Right.
off the top of my head with the numbers.
Councilmember Swanson, that's a good question. One of the questions I had is, that I hope the developer can address, is how does this help us with moderate priced housing? I'm trying to look forward. Right now, we have a fairly decent balance of townhouses and apartments and affordable housing, I guess, for lack of a better term. We know the state is really pushing hard on moderate income housing. Knowing the cost is gonna be in there, those, as Chaz just said, you know, they're gonna be kind of higher end homes. I wanna make sure that as we look forward, we don't get out of balance. If everything develops up there as higher end homes. So that's one of the questions I ask is how does this support our moderate income housing long-term plan? So I think that's a good question. I think too, just having recent experience, one of the questions I asked is particularly on the 6,000 square foot lots with the terrain up there. You know, I'm trying to build a house somewhere up that way, not quite that far, but you know, I think my lot size is a 0.42 acre lot. But by the time that's retained with rock walls, etc., I don't have much space. And so I'd be interested to know how they would use 6,000 square foot lots on that hill and make it look nice. So those are some of the questions in addition to the others I think Scott's mentioned. So Councilmember Swans, go ahead.
The other question I had was on the clustering. I love the idea of clustering. When it affords the leaving of open space, right? It's being proposed in many areas. It's hard for me to visualize, especially in that central area there. There's something that would help me visually to see something that had some ideas of how big the cluster areas would be so that we could have a view of what the potential land savings would be, the open area.
Yeah.
Right now, John, can you blow that up so I can read that, my old man Eisner?
Let me rotate it back to, it's not set up north-south, so it's.
Right, so that north is to the left now.
Yeah.
And that development area B, we have, what is that, 7.84 acres?
Yep.
With 56 units. So as I was looking over this, it was like, okay, so maybe there isn't much open land. And as I'm very familiar with the area, I hike up there and up there with my dogs and stuff quite a bit. That probably the flattest area in that area, at least earthwork and things like that. But it didn't seem like that would be one big giant cluster would be my vision. And then open space would come in other areas, I would assume.
Yeah.
But just something that would visually make it easier for us to.
It's kind of what we were envisioning was you want to.
Yeah, we'll get you up here in a minute.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry, I addressed him.
That's okay.
The only other comment that I would make is just during the general plan process, and we haven't finished the text update of the general plan, but the land use map, we had talked about different ideas for how you do upzoning of density in the exchange for open space. And one that we had talked about was a doubling of density for 30% open space savings, which in this case, you may get that 74 homes, but you'd be retaining or preserving 25 acres, either completely undeveloped or maybe it's undeveloped with trailhead access and other improvements. So that from just a city standpoint of a policy standpoint that we have discussed in the past has been approximately on that level.
And that would include, I would imagine the open space would include the trails as well, correct?
Right.
Whatever.
This is one thing too, I would hope, well, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
That Chaz would address here. You know, my concern is by the time you level everything out, you get all the roads in there, how much of the natural beauty is really going to be preserved up there? Because you can talk about open space, but by the time you get everything ready to build and you plow through that, my concern is that, you know, we're not going to have really much of the beauty of that hill left up there by the time you develop that. And I'd be interested for Chaz and maybe the property owners to tell us, you know, somebody who's done a lot of development up there is, I think has indicated, you know, the minimum size lot up there would be what?
About 15,000 square feet.
15,000 square feet to make it work.
Yeah,
Somebody who's done a lot of development up there.
Yeah.
And so I'd be interested to know how this would work based upon those things. So some of the questions. Anything else for Scott before we ask Chaz to come up? Councilmember Exton, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I'm not assuming, I'm not much of a hiker, so, but, I know the trailheads are something that is a really big appeal to North Ogden. One of the things that I loved about the development agreement we did with Century Farms is that we have like a, a pocket park idea. And so I would like to see what they could do with maybe a development of a trailhead. I think if we develop that up there with a lot of homes, those trails are not just gonna be single, going up there.
Absolutely.
They're gonna get a lot more use. And so if those trails could be developed nicely with maybe, some amenities before, but anyway, just some kind of exchange for that, for some recreational access
Right.
that could be put into a development agreement and just kind of based on, what they really see when they get up there geologically. So.
And there's a few trailheads that are called out. One of the questions that we had, since this is a really high level and, low detail map, basically is what do those trailheads consist of? Are they asphalt parked? Are they restroom? Are they amenitized? What would we expect from those trailheads? So that was a question we had in the staff report.
Councilmember Barker, go ahead.
Just real quick, maybe to educate us, what does HP3 entail? And what's the difference between HP3 and HP2?
So HP2 is 12,500 square foot lots on average. The Cove is much larger than that. They average half acre up to an acre, depending on the area that you're in. But HP2 is basically your R12.5 zone on the hillside, and HP1 is the R110, 10,000 square foot zone up on the hillside. HP3 being an outlier of, as you swing around that hill, not necessarily on the Sears property, but as you get a little further east, it's just one really large alluvial fan. Thousands of years ago, and an untold amount of material came out of those canyons. So we know the fault line's there, but it can be hundreds of feet deep. We don't exactly know where it's at, but you can find traces of it on either side of this alluvial fan. So we have some really sensitive areas to develop up there. And all of the hillside protection zones are essentially our same standard zoning, but with additional geologic requirements. And those are unique to each piece of property as you develop them. So this one, John may have the slope map available to pull up if we need it. It doesn't have a large number of slopes that are over 30%, for instance, but it does have enough general kind of underlying like light pink slope areas that it will require additional levels of geologic development. And also up there, the development has to meet the 1997 hillside study, which we've held other developments to. So we have, it sounds like a 26-year-old study, but hillside hasn't changed a whole lot in 26 years or 100 years basically. So it just says you are sensitive to development in this area, you follow these geologic guidelines.
Which I think's the question I have too is was anybody around when that was zoned HP3? Why was it zoned HP3? Was it a result of that study? Yeah. So as a result of that study, so we surely have to review and see why and what's changed there, because we surely want to protect that hillside and the residents, up there. I would also, John, just want you to clarify, and I don't know if you can, but those trails right now are open access, right? And have been for years. So are those trails? Talk to me about that.
My understanding is those trails have been used by members of the public generally. I couldn't tell you exactly how long. I've lived in North Ogden for about 10 years now. But there might be some argument that the trails are required to be there. The distinguishing factor in trails like these is you're not entitled to the exact location of the trail, but essentially what you're entitled to is access across the property through these type of trails. And so they could relocate the trails with this development and still comply with the laws, assuming these were public trails established now. But that courts have found that sidewalks and streets qualify to get people across the property, and then this type of network of trail system that they haven't shown, I can get it to pop up, would probably meet the court's definition of granting access across the property.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Scott before we hear from property owners or their representative?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to ask, do we know much about water shares?
No, we don't. It would require a water tank, just the elevation alone, our current water tank that's serving the cove. I don't know what the capacity is for that, additional development in that area, but generally that gravity fed tank can only feed about that elevation line. And the elevation line, since north is to the left, the elevation line swings kind of in an arc. Where Nebo connects to this development, that tank, if it could gravity feed, my understanding is it would only be able to gravity feed from Nebo and below, or maybe that first house above it. But I think we're running into both ability to serve and then also fire flows in the area. So they're proposing a tank here, which would be in the northeasternmost corner of the project. And again, in an engineering study, we need to say whether that's the location or whether it gets pushed up further in the service, Forest Service lands, so that it has a few hundred feet of fall and you have water pressure up there.
Yeah, I'd be interested in knowing if the owners have any water shares, because access to the water is not going to be cheap.
Sure. Yep.
It's not.
And and that's it's an assumed when they develop, so they have to be able to provide those for the culinary water. The city would accept them. We're essentially the will serve letter, right, for the city, but that's an excellent question.
Where would secondary water come from?
I think I think this high up on the hill is Marriott, but I just don't know where the Pine View Marriott line runs. But again, we have to bring those water shares forward to the provider and receive a will serve letter.
I just have one more question, John. So John, you're talking about easements by prescription, right?
It's a Utah statute.
Is it different from the easement by prescription legal?
No, it's probably what you're thinking of, but in Utah, it's been put into a statute. It says public use by 10 years creates a public easement for trails.
Exactly. And the only way you can reverse that is by not permitting it, but that's not going to happen.
Once it's established, you can't undo it, but they're not officially declared public trails until someone pursues them in court. So does that make sense? Like, the only people who can say whether a trail's been established is a court. Or an agreement between the landowners. So I think that's what you're talking about,
Right.
but that you can't unwind them unless the entity that holds them, which is usually more than just a city or a county, agrees to. It's usually there's hunting groups, hiking groups, there's a whole litany of people who get involved in that, which is the reason that courts typically say you're not always guaranteed to the exact location of the trail. You're guaranteed access across the parcel.
So the cove was just a lot more cooperative and complementary to the trails. Because the
I
cove
think
really
this-
has kept a lot of those trails accessible.
I think this one does. I think it's just a question, as the mayor asked, on whether or not this is like a +1 benefit to the city or it's a benefit that we already have. So is it in determining whether or not receiving those trails is actually a new benefit to the city? I would argue it probably isn't, because those trails exist and they're public and people can utilize them. I'm not saying that the development is ignoring the trails or overrunning them or trying to not include them. I think that they're doing an excellent job of integrating them into the development. It just becomes a question in that thought of negotiation as a legislative body. Are these trails part of that bundle of sticks of things the city would get in exchange for additional density?
Scott, I'm impressed. Bundle of sticks.
Property rights.
Constitution.
Or,
Wow. Any other questions for Scott, council, before we ask the property owner or the representative to address us? I don't see any, so, yeah, do you?
Yeah, I'll come
represent-
up.
Give us your name and if you're a resident.
I'm Chad Slingy. I live at 198 East 3475 North in North Ogden. I'm with Wasatch Civil Engineering and I'm representing the Sears family with their property. And kind of what we wanted to do, we know this map isn't super detailed. We know there's a lot of work to still ahead of us, but we just wanted to kind of get in front of you guys. So I appreciate Scott and, presenting this to you. And we just kind of wanted to get some ideas of what, there's nothing worse than coming in with spending a ton of money and then having people just, freak out, because we don't want it to freak everybody out. So we just kind of wanted to get some of your guys' ideas and see if this is something that we could would be a possibility to move forward with. So what we're kind of thinking is, so we don't affect a lot of the neighbors next door would be mimic a lot of the cove, you know, to the west side. So the lots are the same. As you move more over to the east, the density would kind of get a little tighter, so the residents on the west wouldn't be bothered as much by what's being built. And then everything over to the east, as you get closer to the steep area, would kind of, you know, we could cluster more over in those areas and create more of a trail system. Kind of have houses that are really closer to the road, kind of very neighborhood-like feeling to them. And there was a comment in there about flat park space. There's really not a lot of flat park space in this development. But what we're hoping is areas that we can maybe do more kind of pocket parks, to where not just residents of this neighborhood, but anybody in the city could come and just have access to little smaller parks, you know, just kind of areas that are open that they could use. There was a question about the trailhead to the east, because there's an area, every time we talk about these developments, residents are very concerned. I know there's access to the trails now, but if we were to come in and just build 2-acre lots, the access to the trails from this corner kind of get cut out. So what we were proposing is kind of the east to donate a lot of that. It's a little steeper area, but it would be left open space. Like you said, the cuts would be a big, you know, we're trying to get away from extensive cuts on that, but build a trailhead and then a restroom to where there's more access to that area of the city. It's kind of, you don't have to go to the North Ogden Divide or over the Pleasant View Trailhead. We want to use a lot of the drainage systems, leave those open. A lot of the trails are actually shown where they actually are at this moment. We're trying to show those where they are as they sit right now, and keep drainage systems open. Kind of helps with the state LID requirements for stormwater runoff. And we're aware to get all those units is probably not going to happen, but what we want to do is be able to find areas to where instead of just going in and cutting out all those big groves of gamble oak, going in and building a 1/2-acre lot and building a massive house and then just wiping all those areas out. If we can cluster areas to the kind of a little more flat areas, we're hoping to get a little more density in those to save areas that are a little steeper with some of the oak trees to where we don't wipe all that out. It's kind of what we're hoping for. And let's see, what else do I got? A lot of the open space that we were hoping for will have a lot of snow storage areas that we were hoping for, because that area gets a lot more snow up in there. That's always kind of a concern in that area. And hopefully what we're hoping to do is when we cluster the homes, we'll eliminate some of those extensive cuts. But that's just areas as we get into it, we'll have to move forward and kind of figure that out. But before we did that, we wanted to see if you guys liked the idea or thought the idea was good, or what else you would like to see. So now fire away and see what we got.
So it seems like to me, the real question here is, how many houses does the council feel comfortable going on that piece of ground?
Yeah, because right now, if we're going with 35 houses, 37 houses is what we can get. That's, very expensive to just get 37 houses. So we're just kind of, what are you guys comfortable with? What could we trade off to kind of work together and make something that the residents want to see, what you guys would like to see in that area, and do our best to keep that area so it doesn't just get all wiped out.
So I think that's the ultimate question. So let me just kind of stop all the council here. I think earlier Scott indicated, our thought process has been, increasing density for 30% open space with some, win-wins for the city and for the developer. So let me just start at this end of the room and just kind of give you a sensation for maybe what the council's thinking, because ultimately, I think that's your question.
Yeah, for sure.
How many homes can the council feel?
And also, what would you like, what's your vision for that area? What would, we're just trying to get an idea of what's the best thing we could build up there and how many houses.
Well, once again, I think we have to answer the question, how does this support our moderate income housing balance long term?
The issue that we're seeing right now is a lot of us, as we're going up the hill, is you're having in the 10,000 square foot, everybody's building 3-car garages and the houses are all ranging. Everything's 1,800 square feet on one main level. And, so we're hoping to get a little smaller houses they'll still be nice construction, but they're not as big. They're not required to have 3-car garage and everything
We
like
just
that.
need to kind of answer that question. I think along with access off the hill, that's a big issue.
And we, not to interrupt you again, we've been working with the property owners to the south. And we've been talking with them to get access out through that way, the time the new subdivision that's going in below the cove right now, that's been going pushed through. So the Schoenberger parcel, we've been talking to those people to be able to access out through them as well, down towards 1050.
Cause yeah, I think 800 East is about full. Yeah, coming off the hill. So let me just, kind of get a sensation, for what council members are thinking.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Councilmember Severing, you have any thoughts you'd like to share regarding this development, of course?
Can I defer? And think about it for a few minutes?
Sure. Yes. Okay, Councilmember Swanson, let's start with you and come down this way.
I defer, throw it back to the left.
What?
No.
Okay,
You
I'll
say you want to
start.
start in the middle?
No, I'm good.
You know, and I know this is gonna sound so cliche, but you know, being a North Ogden resident all my life. There was there's actually been 2 subdivisions that I couldn't even look at. I'll be honest with you, I couldn't even look at them. And that was when the cove first started. And then I'll leave the other one unnamed. The foothills are the queen and king of this city. My initial response when I found out about this was, I was not gonna recommend anything less than what the Cove has done.
Okay.
And that would basically be, they've got half-acre lots and nothing less than half-acre lots. But then I realized, you can't tell me how much, you can't tell me at this point probably, but I mean, the dedication of the streets, do you know how much that's gonna take up? I guess it depends on what we're, kind of the final idea.
The acreage, just to the main roads, I think there's a number on there. I can't remember if it's shown or not.
Well,
But of all the streets, no, I don't have all the streets, no.
regardless of that, my initial response was, you know, I don't want anything less than half-acre lots. Which still puts it at about 150 houses. And that's still too many than what I would like to see.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Ekstrom, do you have anything you'd like to add to Councilmember Severing's thoughts?
Well, I have a brother that's a geologist, so I get very concerned about sticking things in rocks. And kind of the buildability. I love to see houses because that means that people, and that's kind of my perspective. You know, I moved away and wanted to move back, and I was really grateful that someone was willing to develop their property so that I could have a home. And I want to keep North Ogden as North Ogden, but let as many people live here that really want to live here as they can. I like the idea of the different densities, like if you can have some really big lots, and a lot of it is going to depend on the geologist, right? So if you can get, I'm thinking, I just was up in Park City recently, and where you've got great big huge homes on lots of acreage, and then you've got ones that are just like little, like kind of stuck into the side of the mountain kind of townhomes, and they have beautiful views and they have great access. So there's an appeal to lots of different, desires.
Architectural diversity.
Exactly. So, I kind of want to see what really can be done with that property. I really like the idea of developing the trailhead so that, more people can have access to it, and, maybe have some facilities so that, I really love to see anything that brings people together doing the things that they enjoy, right? And outdoors activities is one of them. So I kind of want to see what you can do. But I'm really open to, letting as many people live there as we possibly can. I am interested in kind of a traffic flow problem, because I live right at the end of 1050, and that is a treacherous intersection. And so we've got to think through like how many more cars are going to be coming down, and how much, thinking about a conversation with the school district, and do we need more school? There's just a lot of things to consider. So that's you know, and demographics, what are we looking at? Are we looking at mostly kind of empty nesters? Are we gonna think?
We're kind of hoping, to get people who don't want a big massive home up there, who still want to have a house in that area that can be close to the shelves, that they have an option to be able to move up in that area as well. Because right now they're kind of, everything just gets smaller as you go down the hill and bigger as you go up, and we're kind of hoping that area you could open it up to, different sizes of the houses, to give more options for people who maybe don't want a monster yard, but still want to be in that area, so.
I think your point is well taken. I think we need to match it up with that study. That was zoned HP3 for a reason. I don't know what that reason was, but I'd imagine by the time that gets matched up with a geological report, it's not gonna be 177
Yeah.
homes, but it would be something, and I would just, I think we're all aware that there's gonna be growth in our city, and we encourage that. As long as we call it smart growth and we manage it. Because we kind of seen, we got a little bit behind the 8 ball, right, with soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure, and I think we just need to make sure we're matching that with the growth, and I think that's part of Council Member Ekstrom's question is how do we match that? And how does it fit into the geological report?
And yeah, we'd have to follow all the, we would obviously follow all those requirements that we run into. And we're aware that there's a lot of issues that could arise of that.
I'm anxious to see how many homes are in that 6,000 square foot lot area again.
56 to 57.
It's gonna be interesting to see if that really worked.
Yeah.
What you could fit on the 6,000 square foot lot with that slope would be very interesting.
And kind of what we're hoping is if that area right there doesn't work, if we're able to shift it down a little bit to an area where we can find it, to find areas to where to keep it.
Once again, I'm interested to see how you're gonna get a 6,000 square foot lot on that hill to put a house on. I'm interested. Councilmember Barker?
I'm actually a fan of clustering. So I think but I've only seen it so far in planning stages in one subdivision where they actually allowed true clustering. And I think it'd work great up here where you do cluster a lot of homes, but my only concern, and you mentioned it, as you go up the hill, the homes get bigger. How many people or how many homes in the cove bought 3 lots to build one house? So if we're gonna do a clustering style subdivision, how many people are gonna buy 5, 6 lots to put one home?
Yeah.
And that kind of defeats the purpose of clustering.
Well, yeah, and that would be something that we would build into like the CCNRs and everything of the whole project to where, we would eliminate to where people couldn't do that.
Okay,
Same with colors of homes, we wouldn't want, we'd be very strict on the colors of homes and we try to maintain to where, we can't. I don't know, there's certain colors that I don't think would fit or look very good outside.
Yeah.
So maybe, we'd be able to work with the city of, hey, these are the color, do a color board of what everybody'd like to see and stick it to that. So we couldn't just come in and buy 5 lots, but we'd make it restricted to where you couldn't do that. That's what we plan on doing.
but then if you're gonna do a clustering type subdivision, that means you've got to give something up. So you're giving up green space. Right now, everything's developed here. I don't really see how that would work. I mean, I think it should work, but there still needs to be open space and green space all around it.
Good point, Councilmember Barker. Just a reminder what Mr. Hess said. We kind of said, we're looking at increased density up to double, which in this case would be 75 for a trade-off with open space developed. So, that's kind of a rule of thumb we looked at. Doesn't mean it's statutory or anything, but something we look at. Councilmember Downpass, let's hear from you.
Yeah, the hillside study is gonna be pretty important. I mean, we've talked about that, so I just wanna make sure that whatever is approved is in line with why back in 1997, they determined that that was the zone that it should be. So I think that's really important. I like the idea of clustering generally, but just when I look at the map here, it just, I'm having a really hard time visualizing that many units in such small spaces. And so, I just really want to make sure that we're looking at the plan from 1997. That's really important to me. I don't know if we got a good answer on trailheads. Do you plan on having bathroom type amenities or those type of things at the trailheads and any parking lots?
Yeah,
Like,
we could do a park, we could build a parking lot, we could stub utilities and maybe do a grant for, for bathroom. Or, if we can, if it's a requirement, if that's what comes down to, that we build a small restroom, that we would be open to working with the city to do stuff like that.
thanks.
Councilmember Swanson, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Oh, yeah. These. I moved here 17 years ago and been hiking those trails since my neighbor across the street, about a week into being here, hooked me up one of those trails and introduced me to the water flowing out of the corner and all of that. And I certainly have loved the last nearly 2 decades of hiking those trails and being up there and snowshoeing and all of that. As I walked up there the other day, I was enjoying the beauty, but I was also reminded that it's all private property. Right? From the moment I step off at 1050 there, I'm on somebody else's property. And I had to remind myself, and I think it's good for council to remember, that these are not our foothills. They don't belong to North Ogden City. They don't belong to North Ogden City residents any more than the foothills that my home now sits on belong to the city. It belonged to the individual who developed my neighborhood and the homes around it, as it is with all of our homes, especially all of us up on the hill that are up in what 30 years ago were the foothills, right? I talked to many folks who remember riding their motorcycles in the area where my home sits and where there's a nice, beautiful park behind it and all of that. So I think it's important for us as and you hear the struggle that we're having, right? And it's the balance that we are obligated to find as a council. When we take the oath of office, we take an oath to do 2 things. Uphold the US and the state constitutions, which are pretty heavy in landowner rights. And so we have to be careful that we're not claiming for ourselves things that don't belong to us, or claiming for the city things that don't belong to the city. But at the same time, we still need to protect that beauty as much as we possibly can. I do like clustering. When it truly is clustering, right? A token strip along the east side where because of the ancient land slide and the fault lines and everything else that are over there, make it pretty impossible to build on. A token open area over there it doesn't really do much for me personally. And I think so I can't say how many homes I'd be happy with up there. Blake, you mentioned, what did you say it was 150 if we did half-acre lots? I don't know if that's possible though, because with roads are going to eat up, land and all that kind of good stuff. It's hard for me to pick a number, 100-ish around that number. It could be more, it could be less, depending on how it lays out and what the open space ends up like, right? As I was up there the other day, I was thinking about some of those trails, that Blake and I have hiked, many of us have hiked so many times. But then also thinking about what John has said on them with other developments, as we've talked about trail access, it could be that if we say, hey, we want this trail, the court says, well, there's a road that starts at the south end and sidewalks that go all the way to the north end. The trail doesn't have to be a dirt trail. Right? And we need to be aware that that's a possibility. Hopefully that's something we can work out, that there's a more natural, true trail that can be had in there. But I think the other council members have done a really good job of expressing the grand desires of the city as a whole. Right? Also recognizing the rights that property owners have, and that we have to be cognizant and respectful of those rights. So I'm just going to throw out a number, 100 units, give or take, depending on how it lays out, the gives and the takes. Excuse me. Those kinds of things. So
I appreciate you bring that up. lived in North Ogden for 37 years, and I use these trails every day, and I go to the water tank, to the water pond about every day. So I don't want to see everything wiped out myself. So that's kind of where, when this came across, I was very interested in it, because I'm like, hey, if this can remain something that's a very beautiful area, I'd like to see it too, opposed to just getting wiped out.
Jazz, I would say this, just to kind of put the conversation in perspective, is the council is willing to entertain some increase in density based upon the layout. And I always remind the council of this, yes, there are property rights. And the rights to that land right now is 823. Council has no obligation to rezone that. However, if it becomes a win-win for the city, then I think the council is willing to entertain some increased density up there. While maintaining what we can of open space. So I think the direction, if the council doesn't object to this, is that we kind of refine this, knowing that the council is willing to entertain some degree. I don't think it's 177. You know, it might be double the density for increased space, as Scott talked about, which would be, you know, 75-ish, or council member Swanson said maybe 100, depending on, I think, how it lays out. But I think as we enter into discussions, it's always wise to know that we have to ask the question of how do we maintain property rights, but how do we help the city win?
Yes, for
It's got to be a win-win situation. And so I think as we enter into discussions on whatever the increased density would be, that we enter into it with that.
Okay.
And
Here's and I don't know, this is probably just a curveball, just a question. When you go up to kind of Heber City and areas and you see more apartment buildings that are very kind of high end, would the city be interested if we were able to find an area further away from, say, the Cove and those people, but kind of more to the east, and say do get some of those units and say like a very more high-end townhomes, say, / apartment building? Would that be something? But then we would have more open space and we wouldn't have lots. Would that be something that the
I
city would be?
believe the council has said they're willing to look at increased density of what makes sense up there. I think the key is, as Councilmember Delp has indicated, is the fact we've got to match this up against the study that was done up there.
Yeah.
And it was zoned HP3 for a reason. None of us seem to know exactly what that reason is. And it may have just been a whim, I don't know, but I think matching it up, because we do have obligation while protecting the property rights of individuals, of protecting the property rights of others. And what we found is when we start developing and we change the channel of water, the watershed that comes up that hill affects other property owners. So as a council, that's what we have to balance, is protecting the rights of those who own property, who want to develop it, but protecting the rights of those who may be affected by that development. And that's kind of a hard thing sometimes to come up with that answer. Councilmember Swanson?
Just Chaz, in response to what you said about the townhousing, and I like Mayor's response, we're open to increased density.
Okay.
Probably one of the bigger components of all of this, and what we're doing, is the moderate income housing. Because that is a huge piece of the Utah landscape right now. The housing landscape is more affordable housing. And as you mentioned, right now, everything going on up there is huge and giant. And, you know, if we're talking $1 million plus homes. High-end townhomes to save land sounds great. But high-end means they're more expensive. They're less affordable. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, I mean, you've got a lot of marshmallows in the fire here.
Yeah.
Right, moderate income, preserving open land, honoring the landowner rights. As Mayor mentioned, the effects downstream that can be had by changing how stormwater is handled off the land up there. So good luck.
Okay. Sounds good.
Hey, so Dave, I have a question for you. How do you feel? We're gonna be able to plow all that area up there? A couple of these snow plows might do it, huh?
Yeah.
But I think, Chaz, let's sit down and start, talking about, what works up there. With the spirit of how do we make this a win-win situation? One thing it just sticks in my mind because Councilmember Swanson has a good point here. Is the state is really hot on moderate income housing, and at some point in time, they're probably gonna come out with some direction that says you've got to have 25 or 30% or whatever. John, I don't know how many more houses, the development agreement up there with Marriott is what, 400 or 500?
Yeah,
And we gotta talk another 100 here, pretty soon, we could find ourselves out of balance, so we need to kind of try to look to the overall general plan and make sure we stay in balance too, because those lots aren't gonna be cheap.
No.
You're probably talking a couple hundred, if not $300,000 for a lot up there by the time you put all those amenities and then you put a house on it, no matter how small it is, when you have a lot that's 250, 300,000. You gotta put a pretty good sized house on it to make it work. So let's, I think, sit down and start chatting to see what makes sense. I think we start with kind of matching up with the study, the 1997 study.
Okay.
And seeing what can be done and then we'll go from there, all right?
Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
Take a look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, council, I think we have another item on the agenda tonight. That's our presenter is Mr. Call, our city manager and our attorney. He'd like to kind of get a feel for Weaver County RAMP grant applications that may be coming up here. I think they have to be submitted in the next couple of weeks. So we just wanted to brainstorm on what are some of the things we might want to pursue, and John has come up with a couple ideas he'd like to start generating the discussion with. John?
yeah, so council, several of these projects are ones that the council has talked about in the past. A few more came up today as ideas, as the mayor and I and Scott were talking, and Susan too. But the idea is that there is some RAMP grant money available every year. And we would like to put some of our projects towards it. One of the ones, and I'm going to skip down a bullet point, but I'm going to start with the one that the council has already discussed quite extensively in relation to RAMP grants, and that's the, I don't know what you call it, but I hate to give it a name, so I'm going to call it this park. Because once you name it, it'll stick, right? This is the park next to the old Public Works shop. The Century Farm subdivision, yeah, the one that you referenced earlier, Councilwoman Ekstrom. The idea is that this is kind of a trailhead park with water and some access here for maybe some picnic benches and things. It is a unique park in that we cannot do standard toilets here because it's in a wellhead protection zone. So you can see this faint circle that's kind of hovering in here that you can't have a sewer line in, or at least a standard sewer line in that area to help protect the wellhead that's in this building that's right here. So one option is to pursue this park as one of the grants. I believe on my staff report, I estimated it would be that we'd be looking for a grant up to $200,000. We still would have the estimates and things that we put together to get it in, but the idea is with the property donation, the monetary donation as part of the development agreement, and the city's donation, we probably have enough money to meet half the cost for the city's obligation of the roughly $400,000 park is what we're assuming. So we could apply for a $200,000 grant from the RAMP program. Sorry, I should probably share this one online just so people can see what we're talking about.
And John, while you're doing that, maybe just to refresh the council's mind what a large grant is. I think we're limited on that and what a small grant is, and so this might be $199,950 request.
Yeah, so they have major grants, which are grants that are in excess of $200,000. And then the minor grants are between 2,000 and that $200,000 number, and then easy grants are less than 2,000. Some examples of easy grants we've gotten in the past are some money for music for the community band. The seniors just got a grant to help fix the sound system in the building, to update it and make it so it's usable. And then some minor grants that we've gotten, but both our projects last year for the trailhead and for the sound and lights at the amphitheater were both minor grants, meaning they're less than the $200,000 mark. The last major grant the city got was that phased grant that we got with the amphitheater project. We haven't gotten any other major grants for a major project. But this one, I think, because of the donations that are there and the estimated cost of roughly $400,000, we think that we probably wouldn't apply for this one for the major grant, because you can only apply for one major grant every year. And you're not guaranteed to be awarded it, obviously. So the thought was to look for a project that would work. One of the nice things about this park is it in the development agreement, we're required to utilize the spring for the artesian well that's just to the north of here and incorporated into the park. And one option that we talked about was potentially doing some sort of a water table or a water educational experience for the kids who come here to get a chance to play in water and understand how it works, how it functions. In that agreement, we're actually required to keep that well running and not turn it off. So except in like times of winter and things like that. But so there's an opportunity to use that water in a way that's beneficial for those folks who want to come to this area. Plus, one of the nice things about this is the plan is to use this water to help it cycle down into the future pond park to help refresh the water. So the water will get used multiple times because it won't be reused on site. We won't have all the same health department UV cleaning and disinfection requirements. But we'd be able to help hopefully provide an educational experience for kids if we went that route. The other option we have is just to do a drinking fountain from the well, and that would meet our obligation as well. But the idea is that with the educational and kind of the different experience for kids to participate in, that's more likely to be a successful grant type of a project. Because they really like the educational component for things, as well as unique and interesting things for communities to participate in. Ramp does not like bathrooms. They are not unique and interesting. So
How you design them.
depends on how you design it. Mayor, we will put you in charge of that.
Well, you know, if they're like bathrooms in France, it could be very interesting. Ron, so what would be the out of pocket, just trying to keep our hands around the projects or balancing capital projects?
So I would anticipate the out of pocket would be $85,000 to the city. So there'd be 200 from the ramp, 150 from the developer, or 115, sorry, team. And then there is some land donation that's tied up into this. And so I think our maximum exposure would be the 85,000. But ramp does want us that when you apply for something, you're committing to do it. They also have a box you can check on everything that says, is this something you would do if you got partial funding? With our development agreement, we have an obligation to finish the park. And so this might be one of those parks that we would be checking that box and saying, yes, we will complete it, even if we only get some money that we're asking for. With the amount of money that's on the table this year from the Ramp Foundation, this is highly likely to be a successful project. We would anticipate, because of the private donations, the reuse of some property, and then the educational component would make it a fairly successful project, we believe. So, or a successful application, I should say.
Any questions from Mr. Call?
I do, but I don't know if you can answer, maybe Lawrence. Engineer. What do you do about
He's
this
a private
articulation?
citizen.
I know, but I'm like, but I was just thinking, if I have a question that you couldn't answer, I can snag him after the meeting. So, is this, how much water flow do we get from that well? Is that something that we could have like another stump, or is that something that's just like, a little,
So I looked,
drinking fountain?
I looked up the water right, and it's about, I believe the water right, now I'm gonna get it wrong, but I believe it was half, so it's 0.055 acre feet or cubic feet a second. Is but that translates into a different number as they look over the useful use for a year. So there's not as much water here as available at the stump, but the stump is a very large water right compared to what we use it for, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'm just wondering if people are gonna be coming and filling up their water cups. I mean, people have these in their front yards, right? And so it's like, oh, you can go and fill up your water cup or something like that, your water bottle. So is that something that could be incorporated a part of that as it goes through, and then we
Yeah.
designate as like, only get out of here, don't scoop it your water there.
Educational.
Yeah, so that's one of the requirements is in that agreement is that there be a spot where the family or people can get a drink of the well that they used to own. And so that will be a requirement in the park. It'll be like the stump in that it has to run all the time, because when it's untreated water, you can't ever let it go stagnant or it loses its safety. And so that's why the stump runs all the time, and this one would run all the time for the same reason.
Okay, and since we can't put any bathrooms, are there any good, what facilities are going to be available there for, when you have a public area to kind of,
So there is a question about, could you do some sort of a designed vault toilet that
okay,
it's put in place? Or there is maybe the option to do a sealed sewer line. Although in general, even those are not favored in wellhead protection areas, especially, and there's a certain distance around a wellhead that you're not supposed to do anything. And so we're just trying to, so some of those things are things we'll look at, but we've just kind of gone from the position that there won't be restrooms at this park. With the proximity to commercial district, we feel like we're safe.
There is flowing water.
Yeah.
well, I think that the other thing that I'm thinking of too is that I think this is gonna be a walk-to park for a lot of people, so I think they're probably gonna be within access of either a friend's house or their own house, or they can go back and use that. It's not a really huge park. It's not, I don't know if somebody's gonna spend all day there. So, I'm looking forward to seeing its completion. I think it's gonna be really fun.
Yeah, and I just thought I'd pull up the map so you can. I'll maybe zoom out just a little bit, but this is Lee's. And the park is gonna be in this area, and the trailhead that runs, or the trail that runs out through Pleasant View is right here on Pleasant View Drive. And then it continues that back here behind Smith's. So the idea is this might be like that waypoint somewhere along the trail that people can pause and have lunch with the kids or, grandparents or whatever they want to do that day.
All right, thank
All
you.
right. John, you want to share some of the other ideas?
Okay, we've also been talking a lot about pickleball. And I'm gonna bring this picture up with the caveat that this is not, I'm not saying this is what we're doing. This is just a picture of a pickleball court with a playground next to it. So this is actually the drawings shown that were done for the original Park Committee, and the concept. But the idea is at Loman View, we're planning to replace the playground next year anyways. So we already have $120,000, not budgeted, but kind of planned to go in. And then there's pickleball courts that would be going next to it. This is the one that I think we would likely, there might be a reason to use this as our major project. And again, we have some private donors who have already stepped up and said that they would like to give us concrete work to go towards 4 pickleball courts. We'd still need lights and netting and fencing and things, as well as, and the idea would be that at Loman View, you could put the park here or the pickleball courts here. and then incorporate the playground here and redo it at the same time. The Parks and Trails group has made a suggestion that this park incorporate the hillside right there. It's not steep, but it's a slope. In California and other places, they have concrete slides that are just built into the slope, that there's not a falling hazard and things, and they do it as a very slick and smooth concrete. But there might be an opportunity to take this park from a park that entertains 2 to 8-year-olds and move it into it's not a teenage park, because playgrounds are typically designed like 2 to 8 and 5 to 12. So this would be that 5 to 12 range that would maybe even attract teenagers too. Not that we're trying to, you know what I'm getting at. But the idea is that if this was incorporated as one big project where we've already redone these bathrooms, there might be a chance to look at this park in general and just upgrade. The caveat to that is upgrades are not usually super loved by RAM, but there are some additional components being added, and they do routinely award upgrades, parks that get new equipment, new things. But there's even some things with this Bowery over here that could be done to improve access and it just improved the park in general. There was, so that's a potential for maybe the major grant, although the mayor had a good idea to talk about the major grant. I'm segueing into that now at the future pond park, that we should be starting the environmental hearings here, or open houses here in the next couple of months. We're supposed to have a meeting next week, I believe. But the idea is that park could be the major grant, because if this park was just focused on the pickleballs, courts, and the playground, with the donations and things, we might have enough money. Again, we would exceed that $200,000 number. We might have about that $400,000 expense again for the pickleball plus the playground.
We already have parking lot here, we already have restrooms here. We've already kind of understood the fact that we need to replace that equipment. I think it's 28 years old. So we kind of, in our capital projects funding, indicated that we would do that. It just seems like it'd be more economically feasible here at Lowman View than Barker Park. And if we could utilize that as a minor grant and then look towards the major grant, because I think we've got about $1.2 million commitment down there at least.
Yeah, and just to remind the council that, and this was not included in the staff report, but that's this property right here. The aquatic center's here, Majestic, Maria Montessori, yeah, Majestic's over here. But that's the pond park, that is, there's some federal dollars available for that. Once we get through the environmental process, there might be the chance to use it on the park portion of that project, which, as the mayor mentioned, is $1 million plus for that. A portion of total cost, and then there's a portion that's funded by the feds fund half of that project.
But our obligation's $1 million plus.
For all the
900, it was 900,000 for the park and 300,000 from stormwater. That was like 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's one of those, it's hard to give super good numbers because of how long ago it was budgeted and estimated. But the idea is that this would definitely exceed the city's obligation would exceed the $200,000 number. But we have the commitment to do it as part of our projects anyways, and it's in our capital improvement plan or capital projects plan. And so there's some of the resources that we've been holding and waiting for, we're planning to go this direction. And so there might be a good allocation again of a project we're planning on doing anyways. And I think I mentioned it, but for the minor projects or the normal ramp projects, you're allowed to apply for 3 of them. So if you did the park by the old Public Works, the pickleball courts, and then one of the others that was in the staff report, then those are the 3 you can apply for. And you can do 1 major. So we're really looking at a potential of up to 4 applications we would submit. The next two, or the next one that was something to talk about was the potential of adding asphalt or doing trail upgrades along the canal trail as it runs from Weaver High School all the way to the end of the city. It's mostly on federal land. So most people don't realize that the canal is owned by the feds, managed by Pineview and the other canal companies. But the idea is that we have permission, we can do asphalt, we can upgrade. There are things we're not allowed to do, mostly because of the proximity of homes. Anytime we spray a broadleaf killer, we get concerns from residents that we're killing plants. The flip side is, as many as you might be aware, we haven't sprayed Wadman for broadleaf for a while because of the concerns of the neighbors. And it's pretty weedy, it's pretty rough. And so now we're getting complaints from the neighbors about the dandelions. We're like, well, you can have one or the other. So, but so that's another option as a project. That one's fairly easy to estimate, fairly easy to, you just basically say it's gonna be this many linear feet and it's this cost per linear feet, and then you go out and put it in. And then the last one that I thought might qualify for the minor ramp grant would be a summer program series, focused kind of on the youth, and putting on, and even some adults, because we have a lot of talent in the city. But I'm just gonna pull up the list because I'll probably forget one that I included on the list. But these are not exclusive. It's just a spitball. Hey, what do you think? The idea is that we could do something like a North Ogden Idol, a talent show, some sort of a road show, some summer arts camps, a starfish circus, which is like silks and hoops and juggling. And it's actually a company that comes in and puts it on. And then like a children's art show, and then maybe a musical review. The idea would be to do one of these a month in May, June, July, and August. And find individuals to help put it on. I don't anticipate they would actually be that expensive to put this together, but there'd be costs for advertising and some t-shirts and things like that. But like the kids camp, we would actually charge a tuition. So we might have a program for kids to get scholarships to attend and things like that. So, yeah.
John, don't we get like $1 resident from ramp?
Yes.
So we'd have like $22,000 we could fund this with, or approximately there.
Mhm.
So instead of applying for a separate grant, do we think the money from that could be used here? Because the other thing we've talked about now for a couple of years is extending that trail. We have to have a bridge across the canal there. We're forcing people down on the mountain road to walk instead of coming across that trail.
Yeah, so, and I should have highlighted that during that previous discussion, but essentially what the mayor's saying is where 2600 runs in the mountain road, the trail ends. And people have to go on the road until they can get back down onto the trail. And so there's a question about extending that trail along this route. Pleasant View has given us permission to do that. Again, they manage it. Pineview, yeah.
I don't know whether they kind of.
That's true. I haven't called and asked for permission from them, but Pineview has, but there are some things that need to happen to make sure that people can access it. And one question was if there needed to be a footbridge or something, and where and what that would cost. But I think what the mayor's saying is the summer program that's in the staff report is not a very expensive program that I'm talking about. And there is other ramp monies available that we do put towards programs and events in the city. And so this would be a more expensive project that would maybe fall in that $100,000 to $200,000 range to put the bridge in and make that connection or finalize that connection. That, you know, again, we only get to apply for 3 in that range. And if one is an application for $20,000, then you might be considered that you're leaving 180 on the table that being said, if every application from every city comes in at $200,000 and then the major ones come in at more than 500, they can't fund them all.
Substantial amount of money available over normal.
Yeah,
Understand.
at 2.5 to 3 times the normal amount this year. So there was just some nuances and things that happened, but there's $7 to $9 million available this
See,
year.
this to me is a safety issue because, as you know, there's really no sidewalks or the mountain road is not very wide. And you're right there, that intersection with 2600 and Mountain Road. And if you've seen people come through there, coming off that hill and coming around that corner, I think we're forcing citizens into a fairly unsafe situation there. So to me, the emphasis is on safety there.
And this is why this is intended to be a brainstorming thought or brainstorming approach, because we just want to know which applications the council wants us to file and which ones will you support. They will award the money and then we'll get a notice of an award and then we would spend the money. But essentially, when you're submitting the application, you're committing to do the project. And so usually we try and get these before you in front of you kind of initially in November. But like we talked about, 2 of these at least were ones that the council's been made aware of. So we're kind of talking about the other 2. Maybe even you could argue just one of them's new with, if you look at the pond, pickleball, the Public Works side park. Maybe we should just call it Public Works Park. I don't know. But it actually might work with the educational, the Waterworks Park or something. I don't
Yeah,
know.
the Artesian Spring
Yeah.
Park or something.
So, so what other projects do you want to talk about, council? What else are you interested in? Which direction you want me to go? So, in theory, we would come back next week with a formal kind of nod on, hey, submit these applications. And then we would submit them on, I think that their website says June 14th, but that's a Saturday. So I think it's June 13th. Unless I got my dates. January.
Hey, we got 6 months.
Wasn't
Like-
you,
Yes.
you, January, June, it's all the same.
Any other ideas you'd like John to consider? John, I'll make anything alone. Go ahead, Councilmember Severin.
If you're asking for recommendations, then John, I'd look at the first and second bullet point on page 21. And then I would also recommend, Mayor mentioned that the idea of connecting the canal trail was something you guys had discussed previous to the meeting. So those would be my 3 recommendations if you're looking for that.
Okay. And are you thinking all of those as minor grants?
Well, I took it that we can submit 4 applications, right?
Right.
So 3 minor and 1.
3 minor and 1 major.
Exactly.
So the other major one we talked about was the pond park as a potential. That one's a little harder to estimate, but it is probably would again be a fairly good application with all the other money that's on the table.
Well, since that's kind of future and forthcoming, then that would be the one that I would recommend as my 4th.
We have in our capital projects projection set aside the money for that as a commitment that the city has made.
Mhm. Yes, it's in there in our list of commitments.
Okay.
Anything else? Councilmember Ekstrom?
Yeah, I like those 4 as well. I like the Century Farm, the Artesian Spring Pocket Park one. The pickleball courts, I think, is great. The trail connection, I think Mayor has a good point that it's a safety issue with people walking along there. And the major for the pond park, I really would love to see those performances, but I think those are easy grants. And I think maybe even if we can find, if this is more of a creative resource issue that we need to find people that will do it. And then they can put together what they would like to do and maybe have I don't know how the easy grant system works. I wrote one with Jenny Taylor like last year, I think, for the arts camp, the performance camp. So is that something that goes through the city that has to, so if we have the director kind of like.
So there has to be a sponsor,
Okay,
then it has to be either a 501c3 or a government organization. And so typically we go through the city, but like the senior grant for the sound, we technically ran it through their 501c3 this year. So I guess
Okay.
technically they ran it. And then we've been helping them in administering it because it's our building and stuff, but there has to be, and the easy grants aren't due till March. So that's
Okay,
why we're
so
not
that-
talking about them.
that's
We
what
do
I would
have
like to see done, so.
$22,000.
And then we've got $22,000 also. So I think if we can find, it's more finding the people.
Okay.
So let's see if we can find some directors and some, judges and, I'd probably work with Hannah Goodrich on, because she's got access to judge people. And there's people that like to put on predictions,
Well,
and
and
let's find them.
I have made reached out to a few people I know that live or have lived in North Ogden. Or in neighboring communities that have interest in these type of things. And I think we could find someone who would be interested in doing each of those 4 nights. And it might be easy to say, okay, what would you like to do?
Mhm.
I even thought you could just reach out to piano teachers and be like a massive piano recital. with 2 or 3 students from every
yeah.
teacher. Yeah.
That would be
Just-
fantastic.
Just get people out and get them seeing each other. That's the whole point.
And people love to see their kids and their grandkids. That's you can really get people
And
to come.
we might even find that some of these, like the piano recital, we could do it successfully at the senior center. I mean, there's other venues and other options, not just summer stuff too, so.
Yeah, just use the grant to get a good piano in there.
Yeah.
That's expensive.
Okay, anything else, council, you'd like to give John some thoughts on? Is that a hand raise there, Councilmember Swanson? All right, go ahead.
I agree with the first two.
I couldn't tell.
No, I think those 4 projects are great projects.
All right, John, sounds like you have some direction there to pursue, so we'll look forward to you bringing those back next week at our council meeting. Okay?
Okay.
All right, let's move on to item number 6, which would be public comments. Once again, John, if you would watch online to see if there are comments there, let us know.
Okay.
And anyone here, if you'd step up to the podium, please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. State your name and your resume.
Chris Pulver, North Ogden. Basically, a couple of comments, I guess. As we talked about retaining walls and how I love huge things, I guess that puts me as weird. And so everybody's talking about trails and how they love going up on the trails. I'm a person that walks the streets because sidewalks are safer with my wear wounds from soccer. So anyways, I just thought, and something that the developer mentioned was for engineering was pocket parks. And I thought that was interesting. As you go up the hill, beyond a certain limit and homeowner association or whoever for open green space, there's nothing. So, and I guess, from either pocket parks or even for, I'll say it old because I got gray, is literally just benches at certain spots on the road as you go up, especially in some places that, some of these hills, I don't know if everybody gone straight up these things. I mean, obviously they're pretty extreme. So, I think something like that would be something to think about as we're developing farther up the hill, along, especially Mountain Road as that starts to connect, certain things like that. There could be major features or whatever as benches for old people. Anyway, and then one of the other things was we're talking about the audit committee or subcommittee, whatever you want to call it, is how much we're going to be, because I was talking and the fact that, when you say, how much contact information am I divulging to the entire North, or basically publishing to everybody? So something that maybe to talk about later, but Doug and I were chatting about that today, and I said, I don't remember, saying that, yes, I'm gonna put that in print, but anyway, so, and then there was one other thing, pickleball, I think we talked about that. Maybe that was it. Anyway, thank you.
That's what it's called public service, see,
Hey,
you're serving the public, John never did ask me if it was okay to disclose my information, he just did it. We'll be sensitive, but we do want the community to have access to give feedback, so
well,
whether
and
it's a common email address that's here at the city,
that's
so
what I
you
was-
guys can check or something, we'll be sensitive to
okay.
that, but we do want the citizens to have access to those that are serving.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think that would be a good thing, if I was kind of recommend that as an email or something. I don't know if that's possible. but-
Councilmember Swanson will take care of that, he's in charge of that area.
Right, thank you.
Anyone else this evening like to make a comment? John, do we have anyone online?
We do have a raised hand from Susan Clemens.
All right, let's go with Susan.
Okay, just had to unmute myself, I guess. A little bit of concern about the building going up, I guess, northeast of the cove. My feeling on that is that the closer we get to the national park or the national forest, the less dense we should have as far as homes. So I would encourage you to keep the square footage on the lots as high as you can. We have a lot of wildlife coming down. We're displacing wildlife up there. If we could push them all back up the mountain, that would be really nice, but that's not going to happen. So that's my concern with the development of that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate your comments. Anyone else? John online or anyone else here? All right, we will move on then to mayor, council, or staff comments. Let's start with staff. We'll work backwards here. Any comments online from staff? Susan, John, Dave, Scott?
Just a shout out to the plow and the salt truckers, and we've had some weird storms where parts of the city get 4 inches of snow and the rest of the city gets nothing, or they get rain, so. It wasn't intentional, we did try to keep the mayor from getting out of his house, but. His neighborhood got pounded and the rest of the city got rained on, so.
It's okay. Okay, no problem. I did have that as a note to thank those that are out plowing snow. They're out at early hours in the morning trying to keep the streets clear, and it has been really strange where it hits and where it doesn't hit. So Dave, I think I sent you an email. Please thank your team for the good work they're doing. Which, comes with interesting things, salt, sand, and blades. I was telling John, we may have saved a little money on gas because we were anticipating gasoline prices to go up. And they came down, John goes, well, that's a blessing because now we have to spend it on salt, sand, and new blades for the trucks, so. Dave, thank you for heading that up and all the work you do. All right, anything else from staff? Council, do you have anything you'd like to bring up? Councilmember Swanson? Good, thank you.
That easier for you to see?
Oh, it's hard for me to see that far, but thank you for raising your hand.
Maybe if I move it a little.
Yeah, it gives me
Two things, for the Citizens Budget Subcommittee. I like the idea of a central email. We don't publish the addresses and phone numbers of our planning commission, who are appointed and a very public group. So we won't be publishing that information on you guys. But a central email that the residents can email into, and perhaps our chair and co-chair can be the ones that are monitoring that. And then just a shout out to our employees, obviously the plow truck operators, from the big ones with the wings to the little ones on the nose of the pickups, all the way down to all of our employees are. It has, over the last 9 years, it's been, I'll just say it's a joy to work with government employees that defy the stereotype of government employees. Conscientious, hardworking, good people. And I think most government employees are that way, but the stereotype can often, and the message that's out there in the public can often be very different than that. And we have great employees that work hard, they earn what we pay them, and they do a really good job of keeping the city going. Grateful, so. That's all I have.
Anyone else? Councilmember Delapass?
I just wanted to mention the dumpsters, the recycling dumpsters by the old Public Works site. They're getting quite full with the holidays. Hopefully, we're gonna get past that, but just a reminder to citizens to please, if they are full, just turn around and come back another day, because the next day or 2 days extra, it will be dumped. Also with cardboard, please compact your cardboard, make it so you don't throw a big, 30 by 30 box in there without mashing it down, because it creates less space. There's been a lot of actual trash that has been left outside of those dumpsters, so we obviously want to keep our community nice and clean, so just be very mindful of that. Thanks.
On top of that, I was listening to some recycling information the other day. And a lot of the Christmas wrapping paper that people think is recyclable is not. And so we continue our education on what is recyclable. That would be helpful too. Anything else? Okay, I don't see any comments. I just had one or two. Councilmember Swanson, this is regarding the budget. If you could come back maybe next week with some recommendations on timing and meetings that need to take place. So we can get that process moving along. I think John will be bringing a budget amendment here in the near future. I've sat down with John. I've had a conversation with Councilmember Swanson in regards to compensation of employees. We did budget a portion of that, but as we've analyzed what's going on, we may be exceeding that. So we'll need to have a budget amendment there, but also, I think council, if you'd be thinking about, we do have parameters that we set on budgeting. I think 2 years ago, it might be good to review those or refresh to see what parameters we would like to work under in regards to the budget this year. So, Councilmember Swanson, if you could just lead that discussion, maybe next week. Timing and the meetings you'd like to see the council be involved in to get that budget done along with the support of this committee. That'd be good. Anything else? If not, I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Motion